All right, here we are then, legally speaking, and all terms that are legalese. We're looking at the minimum wage, which has now become into effect from today. The paper's been signed, is that right?
Well, it was actually signed over the weekend, so from date of signature, that's the new minimum wage.
20 Rand an hour, the new minimum wage. This affects all sectors of society, be it someone that you have as what I put a house executive, someone that you employ.
A domestic worker, and you'll see, in terms of Schedule 1 to this document, and it's freely available on the internet, the community can go out and actually download the same, have a look at it, because you are now bound by this new piece of legislation. Farm workers, number one, they will earn a minimum of 18 Rand an hour. Domestic workers are entitled to 15 Rand per hour. And then workers employed on an expanded public works program. So if they're employed by the government or by public works, then they can earn 11 Rand an hour. Now, I see there's a bit of a
discrepancy here.
I want to know why there's this discord between
the two,
the public sector
and the private
sector. And
now we pay taxes. Why should there be? Let's get that as a tax reduction.
We're going to have to bring in. I'll speak to Edwin. He's our tax expert at the office.
Ask him to come in and lend his expertise here. Why not? If you have, or in the private sector as you are, why can't you have that sort of as a tax reduction? My goodness, it's a win-win situation.
I don't think that's going to be allowable, but we'll see if we can get past SARS.
No, all right, okay. Well, there's an interesting one for you. Anyway, yes, getting back to it.
So coming back to the Act itself, the one new thing that cropped up essentially is now the minimum wage is established. We can't get past that. There are figures that are inserted into Schedule 1, and that is the minimum wage for each person in those designated areas or levels of employment.
Okay.
The next issue that comes to the fore is the establishment of the Wage Commission. So this is a group of people that would be members of this committee, and they would then make a determination of what the minimum wage is. So within 18 months from the signing in, the Commission's going to have to make a determination and say, yes, this is the amount of money it's going to cost you for minimum wages from now on. So there will be probably a yearly increase in the minimum wage from here on out.
Oh, my.
And we cannot see specifically from the Act itself that they're limited in any way in determining the
so
the
this can go
wage.
sky high.
My biggest issue over here is there's no limitation, and that commission then must make a determination, and they would take things like the GDP, growth in the economy, inflation into account when coming to a decision.
Now, what happens if the person who has to pay this in the private sector, like you and me, we have the house executive, but we don't, as a person who employs the house executive, we don't get an increase.
And then you as the employer are just going to have to foot the bill based on this legislation. So unfortunately, you're going to have to cut somewhere else if you want to still employ someone.
No, but what I'm saying is, 10 to 1, you'd have to let the house executive go and say, well, I can't afford more.
Well, if it comes to that and it's outside of your budget and you can't see a way to actually pay that, then you're going to have to run retrenchments. You're going to have to make those positions redundant.
So this, which would be seen 20 Rand as 20 Rand as a very basic from now, could be, as much as it's good news maybe for those who are affected by it, it can also be bad news if there are increases along the way.
If there are increases in the long term, this could see a shrinking in the market itself.
Okay.
And yes, there's
nicely put. Shrinking in the market.
Again, we're all constrained by budgets.
By a lot of things, the price of the petrol going up, I'm talking about someone who employs someone else to clean their house. You're affected by a lot of things.
Well, definitely. With the petrol going up, inflationary forces force everything else to go up as well.
It's all economics.
When looking at that in a market-driven society, we're essentially capitalistic in nature. The biggest issue now is you are bound by this legislation. And if you can't afford it, unfortunately, at the end of the day, somebody's going to lose their job. Now,
Right.
20 Rand might not sound like much, but that's 20 Rand per hour. Now, has the community out there actually taken into consideration, if I've got a domestic worker that's working for me day in and day out, what are the cost implications based on this?
What indeed?
And people are going to have to go out and do the calculations.
When they signed this paper, surely the committee must have gone out, had a look, and really done their homework. Have they really done their homework? Because what you've just said in this very, very short time, I'm going, but did they tick all the boxes? Did they mark all the X's? Did they really look at this?
Well, remember, when the bill was tabled, there were lots of questions that were asked. It was actually sent back. They had to redraft the same. They had to take a lot into consideration. And they felt that when this was signed in and when it was lastly tabled, that these were equitable amounts in our society currently. Now, when you look at the purpose of this act, it is specifically targeted at improving the wages of the lowest paid workers, protecting workers from unreasonably low wages. Now, there's unscrupulous people out there, so the act in itself is not a bad thing, but you must also look at the negatives that can flow from it. And yes, I believe that we did actually need this type of legislation in South Africa, because there's employers out there that are charging their workers for certain things. They make deductions that are illegal, that kind of thing. And it's a good thing that this piece of legislation is in power, limiting the amount of exposure specifically by workers to unscrupulous actions by employers out there.
Okay, so it has its positive and negatives.
No, definitely. Definitely does have its positives and negatives. But I always say, like, when you're looking at a settlement agreement, if both parties are unhappy, then you've reached a good settlement.
Oh, is that how it works legally? Is that how it works?
Well, on a basis where, because any settlement is give and take. And if you're retaining too much, then you're going to be happy. But then you're not giving enough.
Okay.
So when you look at it that way, if both parties are unhappy, then yes, you've
done something right.
You've done something right.
In this case. Totally unnatural. Goes against the natural work of things, but okay. I'm trying to get my head around that one. It's a small little head. It's not a big head at all. All right, well, there we go. So, that said, what are the grey areas here? Is that part of the grey area, or are there any real grey areas, or have we already looked at that?
Well, the biggest thing with this is, I think, the unforeseens later on. So these midterm plans with regard to increases, that does leave the community out there guessing.
Okay.
What could happen in future? How much must I plan for in future? What must my budgeting be like? That kind of thing. The act itself is actually quite short and to the point.
Okay.
So they're leaving little to chance. Rather keep it as short as possible, but to the point where there are no real grey areas. There's no major loopholes in the act.
This is a very short white paper then?
Well, again, this is now signed into power. So it's past the stage of white paper.
Okay. So it's now
law.
It's now law.
It's now legislation. And again, the definitions, and you yourself can see from page 4, just over half a page pertaining to the definitions alone. So very, very short, to the point. They explain the purpose of the act, and then it simply says, subject to sections 2 and 3, the national minimum wage will be as per the schedule attached. And that schedule will then be changed on a periodical basis.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
No, thank you.
Short, sweet, to the point.
Short, sweet, and to the point.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for coming through, Grant, once again. I do appreciate it, as always. And we always keep abreast of things. I mean, we found out today, and here you are, quickly discussing this with us. So thank you once again. Appreciate it.
Thanks.